The thunder of hooves echoed across the empty plains as Vaughn Blackwood rode through the darkness, his horse lathered in sweat, pushing on despite exhaustion. The telegram had arrived just before dusk. Katherine Dawson Ranch under siege, bandits threatening all, no law coming. That was all he needed to know. He'd been riding ever since through rain and darkness, guided only by stars and desperation. It was 1876 in the Montana Territory, a land still wild and untamed. Vaughn had never met Katherine Dawson, but her father had saved his life during the war. Before James Dawson died, Vaughn had promised to look after his daughter if she ever needed help. Now, 12 years later, he was finally making good on that vow. The first glow of dawn broke across the horizon as Vaughn spotted the smoke, too much smoke for a morning cookfire. His heart pounded as he urged his horse faster, cresting the hill that overlooked the Dawson property. The sight below made his blood run cold. 3 buildings were ablaze, orange flames licking at the morning sky. Men on horseback circled the main house, shooting into the air and shouting. A lone figure stood on the porch, rifle raised, somehow holding them at bay. Vaughn didn't hesitate. He checked his Colt revolver, made sure his Winchester was loaded, and charged down the hill. The element of surprise was his only advantage against what looked to be 8 men. The first bandit fell before he even knew Vaughn was there, a clean shot from the Winchester dropping him from his saddle. The others turned, confusion giving Vaughn precious seconds to pick off another. Then chaos erupted. "Who the hell is that?" one of the men shouted. "Don't know, but he's dead," another replied, raising his gun. Bullets whizzed past Vaughn's head as he leaped from his horse, taking cover behind a water trough. The defender on the porch seized the opportunity, firing with deadly accuracy and dropping another attacker. Vaughn reloaded, took aim, and fired twice more. 2 more bandits fell. The odds were evening. "Carlson, we're outgunned," one of the remaining men shouted. A bearded man, presumably Carlson, cursed loudly. "Fall back, we'll return with more men." The bandits retreated, firing wildly as they rode away. Vaughn kept his rifle trained on them until they disappeared over the ridge, then cautiously approached the house, hands slightly raised to show he wasn't a threat. "That's far enough," came a woman's voice, steady despite the circumstances. "State your business." Vaughn stopped, squinting through the smoke at the figure on the porch. She was tall and slender, with auburn hair escaping from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The rifle in her hands didn't waver. "My name's Vaughn Blackwood. I'm a friend of your father's." "Got your telegram and came as quick as I could, Miss Dawson." She studied him for a long moment, suspicion evident in her stance. "I sent no telegram." Vaughn frowned, reaching slowly into his pocket and producing the crumpled paper. "Someone did." She lowered her rifle slightly, fatigue suddenly visible in the slump of her shoulders. "Must have been Frank before they got him." "My foreman," she explained, gesturing toward one of the burning buildings. "He rode for help yesterday when Carlson and his men first showed up." "I'm sorry about Frank," Vaughn said sincerely. "I came to help if you'll have it." "Why would you ride all night for someone you've never met?" Her voice was laced with suspicion. "I made a promise to your father. Before he died at Gettysburg, he saved my life. Said if you ever needed help, I was to provide it." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Katherine Dawson finally lowered her rifle completely. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, you're about 12 years late, but I suppose now is better than never." She glanced at the retreating dust cloud. "They'll be back by nightfall with more men. We have work to do." Vaughn nodded, taking in the damage to the ranch. 2 outbuildings were completely destroyed and the barn was still smoldering. Dead men lay scattered across the yard, some bandits, but others wore the clothes of ranch hands. "How many people do you have left?" he asked, already assessing their defensive options. "Just me," Katherine replied, her voice hollow. "They killed everyone else yesterday. I've been holding them off since then." Vaughn's respect for her increased immediately. Holding off 8 armed men alone for a full day was no small feat. "What does Carlson want?" he asked, dismounting and leading his exhausted horse toward the water trough. "My land." Katherine's voice hardened. "There's a railroad survey crew coming through next month. Word is they're planning a new line from Helena to Bozeman, and my ranch sits on the straightest path. Carlson works for the railroad men, or so he claims." Vaughn nodded grimly. It was a familiar story across the territories, powerful men using violence to secure land for development. "We need to prepare," he said. "You know this land. What's our best position?" Katherine seemed surprised by his immediate willingness to stay and fight. "You're not suggesting we leave?" "This is your home," Vaughn said simply. "I didn't ride all night just to tell you to abandon it." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "The root cellar connects to a tunnel that leads to the creek bed. My father built it during the Indian Troubles. We can use it if things get desperate." "Good. Let's gather all the ammunition and supplies we can. Move them to defensible positions." They worked side by side throughout the morning, dragging furniture to barricade windows, loading rifles and shotguns, preparing for the siege to come. As they worked, Vaughn learned more about Katherine Dawson. She'd been running the ranch alone since her father died in the war. 26 years old now, she'd turned down multiple suitors who were more interested in her land than in her. The ranch was profitable, with 200 head of cattle and good water rights. She had employed 6 ranch hands, all now dead thanks to Coulson. "What about you, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked as they prepared a meal from her dwindling supplies. "What brings a man like you to this territory?" Vaughn considered the question while slicing bread. "After the war, there wasn't much left for me back east. My family's land in Virginia was confiscated. I drifted west, worked as a scout for the army for a while, then tried my hand at mining. These days I do odd jobs, some hunting and trapping." "A drifter then," she said, not unkindly. "I suppose so." He didn't mention the nightmares that still plagued him, the faces of men he'd killed that haunted his sleep. Some things were better left unsaid. As afternoon wore on, they spotted dust on the horizon. Vaughn climbed to the roof with a spyglass and counted the approaching riders. 15 men, he reported when he came back down. Well armed from the look of it. Katherine's face paled slightly, but her voice remained steady. Still better odds than yesterday. Vaughn couldn't help but admire her courage. "We have good cover and plenty of ammunition. If we're careful with our shots, we can hold them off. And if we can't," she asked. "Then we use that tunnel and live to fight another day," he replied, "but it won't come to that." The sun was low in the sky when Coulson's men arrived, spreading out around the ranch house in a loose semicircle. A large man with a thick beard rode forward, stopping just out of rifle range. "Miss Dawson," he called. "I see you found yourself a friend. Mighty kind of him to come die with you." Katherine stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but Vaughn stayed hidden inside, his Winchester aimed through a crack in the barricaded window. "This is your last chance, Coulson," Katherine shouted back. "Take your men and leave. There's nothing for you here." Coulson laughed, the sound carrying across the yard. "The railroad's coming whether you like it or not. Sign the papers I brought, and you can walk away with $500. That's fair. My land is worth 20 times that, and you know it." Katherine's voice didn't waver. "I'm not signing anything." "Then you'll die on this worthless piece of dirt." Coulson raised his hand, signaling his men. "No quarter, boys. Kill them both." The first volley of bullets splintered the wood around Katherine as she dove back through the door. Vaughn fired 3 quick shots, dropping one of Coulson's men and sending the others scrambling for cover. "Stay low," he told Katherine as she crawled to her position at a side window. "Make every shot count." For the next hour, they exchanged fire with Coulson's gang, carefully conserving ammunition while keeping the attackers at bay. Vaughn moved from window to window, changing positions to confuse the bandits about how many defenders were inside. As darkness fell, Coulson's men grew bolder, inching closer to the house. One made it to the porch before Katherine's shotgun blast sent him tumbling backward, dead before he hit the ground. "They're trying to surround us," Vaughn said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need to thin their numbers more." Katherine nodded grimly, reloading her shotgun. "I've got an idea. There's coal oil in the kitchen pantry. We could make some fire bottles." "Risky," Vaughn said, "but it might work." They quickly prepared several bottles, stuffing cloth wicks into the necks. When a group of bandits made another rush toward the house, Vaughn lit the first bottle and hurled it through a broken window. It exploded in a ball of flame, catching 2 men in the blaze. Their screams echoed across the yard as they ran, trying to extinguish the flames consuming their clothes. The attack faltered, the remaining men pulling back to regroup. In the lull, Vaughn and Katherine took stock of their situation. They had driven off or killed nearly half of Coulson's force, but ammunition was running low. "We can hold out until morning," Vaughn said, checking their remaining cartridges. "But if they don't give up by then—" Katherine nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. "If it comes to it, you should use the tunnel, get to town, bring back the law." Vaughn shook his head firmly. "I'm not leaving you here." "Don't be foolish," she said, though her eyes betrayed gratitude. "There's no sense in both of us dying." "No one's dying today except Coulson and his men," Vaughn replied with a conviction he wasn't entirely sure he felt. Outside, they could hear Coulson shouting orders, reorganizing his men for another assault. Vaughn peered through a crack in the boards and saw them spreading oil around the base of the house. "They're going to try to burn us out," he warned. Katherine's expression hardened. "The root cellar. Now." They grabbed what supplies they could carry and retreated to the kitchen, where Katherine moved a heavy cupboard to reveal a trapdoor. They descended into darkness just as the first flames began licking at the outer walls of the house. The root cellar was cool and earthy, lined with shelves of preserved foods. Katherine lit a lantern, illuminating a narrow tunnel at the back. "It comes out behind those cottonwoods by the creek," she explained, pointing in the general direction. "About 200 yards from the house." Vaughn considered their options. "If we circle around, we might be able to flank them while they're focused on the house." Katherine looked at him with surprise. "You still want to fight? We're outnumbered 2-1. "They think they've trapped us," Vaughn said. "That gives us the advantage of surprise." A slow smile spread across Katherine's face. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe I underestimated you." They gathered what weapons they could carry and made their way through the narrow tunnel, emerging behind a stand of cottonwoods as the night sky glowed orange with the burning house. From their position, they could see Coulson and his men gathered in front of the inferno, watching with satisfaction as the home Katherine had defended her entire adult life was consumed by flames. "We'll split up," Vaughn whispered. "I'll circle around to the barn ruins. You take position by that rock formation. We'll catch them in a crossfire." Katherine nodded, her expression resolute in the firelight. "Coulson is mine." They separated, moving silently through the darkness. Vaughn reached the charred remains of the barn and positioned himself behind a partially standing wall. From there, he had a clear shot at most of Coulson's men. He waited until he saw Katherine's signal from her position, then took aim at the nearest bandit. His first shot dropped the man instantly. Before the others could react, Katherine opened fire from her position, creating the illusion of multiple attackers. Coulson's men scattered in confusion, firing blindly into the darkness. "Where are they?" someone shouted. "They are all around us," another cried. Vaughn methodically picked his targets, dropping 3 more men before they realized what was happening. Katherine's aim was equally deadly, her rifle cracking in the night as bandit after bandit fell. Coulson, realizing he'd been outmaneuvered, made a desperate dash for his horse. Katherine stepped out from her cover, rifle raised. "James Coulson," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "This ends now." Coulson spun, drawing his pistol with surprising speed. Vaughn's heart stopped as he saw the gun level at Katherine. He fired at the same moment Coulson did, his bullet striking the bandit leader in the chest just as Coulson's shot went wide. The remaining bandits, seeing their leader fall, lost whatever courage they had left. They mounted their horses and fled into the night, leaving their dead behind. Vaughn rushed to Katherine's side, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, staring at the burning remains of her home. "No, but everything I had was in that house." Vaughn followed her gaze, feeling the heat of the flames on his face. "We'll rebuild it, better than before." Katherine turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. Vaughn hadn't meant to say it, hadn't planned to stay beyond this fight, but as he looked at her standing there proud, undefeated despite everything he knew, he couldn't simply ride away. "If you'll have my help," he said carefully. "I made a promise to your father." "Is that the only reason you'd stay?" she asked, her voice soft against the crackling of the fire. Vaughn considered the question, looking into her eyes that reflected the dancing flames. No, he admitted. It's not. Katherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Good, because we have a lot of work to do, Mr. Blackwood. Vaughn, he corrected. If we're going to rebuild a ranch together, you might as well use my given name. Vaughn, she repeated, testing the name. And I'm Katherine, though most people call me Kate. Kate, he said, liking the way it sounded. First light, we'll start rebuilding. They spent the remainder of the night in the root cellar, the only structure that survived the fire. As dawn broke, they emerged to survey the damage in full daylight. The house was gone, as were most of the outbuildings. The dead lay where they had fallen, a grim reminder of the previous day's battle. We should bury your people properly, Vaughn said, looking at the bodies of the ranch hands who had died defending the property. Kate nodded solemnly. They were good men. They deserved better than this. They spent the morning digging graves on a small hill overlooking the ranch, burying the ranch hands with care and respect. The bandits they dragged to a shallow gully and covered with rocks and dirt enough to keep the scavengers away, but nothing more. By midday, they had taken stock of what remained. Some tools had survived in a storage shed that escaped the worst of the fire. A few cattle had scattered during the fighting but could be rounded up. The well was intact, as was the creek that ran through the property. First thing we need is shelter, Vaughn said, wiping sweat from his brow. Something temporary until we can build a proper house. Kate nodded, already gathering usable wood from the ruins. There's a stand of pines on the north ridge, good straight trunks for cabin logs. They worked tirelessly through the day, salvaging what they could and planning what needed to be done. As the sun began to set, they constructed a simple lean-to against the remaining wall of the barn, just enough to provide shelter for the night. As they sat by a small fire, eating a sparse meal of jerky and beans, Kate broke the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Why did you really come, Vaughn? A promise made 12 years ago seems a thin reason to risk your life for a stranger. Vaughn poked at the fire, watching sparks rise into the darkening sky. Your father didn't just save my life, he said finally. He saved my soul. Kate waited, giving him space to continue. I was 19 when I joined up. Thought I was doing my patriotic duty. But the things I saw, the things I did. He shook his head. By Gettysburg, I was lost, didn't care if I lived or died. Your father found me after I'd been wounded, bleeding out behind enemy lines. He could have left me, should have, by all rights. Instead, he carried me back to our lines, got me to a field hospital. Vaughn stared into the flames, remembering. Before he left to rejoin his unit, he told me something I never forgot. He said, "You're alive for a reason, son. Find that reason and hold on to it." 3 days later, he was dead, but those words stayed with me. He looked up at Kate, meeting her eyes across the fire. When that telegram came, it felt like maybe this was the reason. Maybe this is what I've been looking for all these years. Kate's expression softened. That sounds like my father. He always believed everything happened for a purpose. He spoke of you often, Vaughn said. Said you were the strongest person he knew, even when you were just a girl. A smile touched Kate's lips. He exaggerated. I wasn't nearly as brave as he thought. I don't know, Vaughn said, thinking of how she'd held off Coulson's men alone. From what I've seen, he might have undersold it. Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition of a kindred spirit. Both had suffered losses, both had endured. And somehow, against all odds, they'd found each other. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work. They felled trees, stripped bark, and began constructing a cabin to replace the burned house. Vaughn rode to the nearest town, Helena, to purchase supplies and hire a couple of temporary hands to help with rebuilding. Word of the attack spread quickly, and the territorial marshal rode out to investigate. He took statements from Vaughn and Kate, promising to send telegrams to find out if Coulson had really been working for the railroad or had simply been using their name. Either way, the marshal said before riding out, you were well within your rights to defend your property, Miss Dawson. Don't expect any trouble from the law on this matter. As spring turned to summer, the ranch slowly took shape again. The new cabin was smaller than the original house, but sturdy and well built. Vaughn constructed it with an eye toward expansion, planning for additional rooms that could be added later. They rounded up the scattered cattle and found most of the herd intact. With the help of the temporary hands, they repaired fences and rebuilt the barn. By July, the ranch was functioning again, though on a smaller scale than before. Through it all, Vaughn and Kate worked side by side, their initial alliance of necessity growing into something deeper. He admired her resilience, her unwillingness to surrender even when all seemed lost. She appreciated his quiet strength, his steadfast reliability. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the new cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Kate turned to him. "The hands contracts are up next week," she said. "Will you be leaving too?" Vaughn looked at her, surprised by the question. "Do you want me to leave?" Kate hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I've managed this ranch alone before. I could do it again if necessary." "That's not what I asked," Vaughn said gently. She met his gaze, vulnerability showing in her eyes for perhaps the first time since he'd known her. "No, I don't want you to leave." Vaughn reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm rough against her skin. "Then I'll stay for as long as you'll have me." "It won't be easy," she warned. "This land demands everything you have and then some." "I've never been afraid of hard work," he replied, "and I've never found anything more worth fighting for than what we've built here." Kate's fingers tightened around his. "It's not just the ranch I'm talking about, Vaughn." He understood her meaning. Relationships out here were as challenging as the land itself, perhaps more so. People broke under the strain, dreams shattered against the harsh realities of frontier life. "I know," he said simply. "I'm not afraid of that either." The look she gave him, then hope mingled with lingering caution, made his heart swell. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, neither needing more words to understand what had passed between them. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Vaughn built a separate cabin for himself nearby, respecting the proprieties, but they spent most waking hours together. They took their meals together, planned the future of the ranch together, and gradually shared more of their histories with each other. Kate told him of her childhood on the ranch, learning to ride almost before she could walk. Of her mother's death from fever when she was 12, and how she'd taken over running the household. Of the letter that arrived informing her of her father's death at Gettysburg, and how she'd sat on this very porch and promised the empty sky that she would keep his dream alive. Vaughn shared stories of his own past, his privileged upbringing in Virginia, his disillusionment with the Southern cause, his years of wandering after the war. He told her about the nightmares that still sometimes woke him and how they seemed less frequent since he'd come to the ranch. "You give me purpose," he admitted one evening as they walked along the creek. "Something I haven't had in a long time." Kate stopped, turning to face him. "Is that all I give you?" The directness of her question caught him off guard, but Vaughn had never been one to shy away from truth. "No," he said, taking her hands in his. "You give me hope, a future I can see clearly for the first time in years." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "And what does that future look like, Vaughn Blackwood?" "It looks like this land," he said. "This ranch. You and me, building something that lasts." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative, as if both were afraid the moment might shatter if handled too roughly. Then Kate's arms wound around his neck and Vaughn pulled her closer, deepening the kiss as the setting sun cast long shadows across the grass. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Kate smiled up at him. "I think I could get used to that future." Their courtship progressed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. They worked hard during the day, building and planning, and spent evenings learning each other's hearts and minds. By the time the first snow fell in November, Vaughn knew he wanted to make their arrangement permanent. He rode to Helena again, this time to purchase a ring. The jeweler had little selection, but among the modest offerings was a simple gold band set with a small emerald. "It matches her eyes," Vaughn said, handing over his carefully saved money. On the ride back to the ranch, he rehearsed what he would say, how he would ask. But like many carefully laid plans, his went awry almost immediately. He returned to find Kate in a state of agitation, pacing the cabin with a letter clutched in her hand. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting aside his saddlebags with the ring box safely hidden inside. It's the railroad, she said, thrusting the letter at him. They're claiming Coulson was acting on their behalf after all. They're threatening legal action for the deaths of their representatives unless I agree to sell at their price. Vaughn read the letter, anger building with each line. This is nonsense. Coulson and his men attacked you without provocation. The marshal took our statements. The letter says the marshal has been replaced, Kate said grimly. The new one is reviewing the case. Vaughn crumpled the letter in his fist. Then we'll fight them in court. We have rights to this land. Kate's laugh was bitter. Courts out here are bought and paid for by men with money. The railroad has plenty. So what are you saying? Vaughn asked, dreading her answer. That we give up, sell out. No, she said firmly. Never, but we need to be prepared for a fight that might not be won with rifles this time. Vaughn nodded, thinking quickly. I know a man in Helena, a lawyer who doesn't bend to railroad money. I'll ride back tomorrow, bring him here. Kate looked at him with surprise. You would do that? Ride back after just returning? I would do anything for you, he said simply. For us, for this land. The sincerity in his voice seemed to catch her off guard. She stepped closer, searching his face. You really mean that, don't you? With all my heart. The ring box suddenly felt heavy in his saddlebag. This wasn't how he'd planned to do this, but perhaps there would never be a perfect moment. Kate, a knock at the door interrupted him. They exchanged puzzled glances. Visitors were rare, especially in weather that threatened snow. Vaughn opened the door to find a well-dressed man standing there, flanked by two others who had the unmistakable look of hired guns. Miss Dawson. The man asked, looking past Vaughn to Kate. My name is Prescott Williams, representing Western Union Railroad. I believe you received our letter. Kate stepped forward, her posture straightening as it always did when she faced a challenge. I did, and my answer is no. This land is not for sale at any price. Williams sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. I had hoped we might discuss this civilly. The railroad is prepared to be generous $1,000 for the property. The land is worth 5 times that, Vaughn interjected. And that's before accounting for the bloodshed your previous representative caused. Williams regarded him coolly. And you are, Vaughn Blackwood, Miss Dawson's partner in this ranch. I see. Williams' tone suggested he saw all too clearly. Well, Mr. Blackwood, the situation is quite simple. The territorial governor has granted Western Union certain rights of passage. If we cannot secure land through purchase, we have other legal means at our disposal. Eminent domain requires fair compensation, Vaughn countered. And it can be challenged in court. A thin smile crossed Williams' face. Courts take time, Mr. Blackwood, time during which a small ranch like this might face all manner of difficulties. Cattle rustling is common in these parts. Accidents happen. The threat was unmistakable. Vaughn's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, but Kate placed a restraining hand on his arm. You're threatening us on our own property, she said, her voice steely. I suggest you leave while you still can. William's smile didn't waver. We'll be in Helena for the next week, should you reconsider. After that, events may take their natural course. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Dawson, Mr. Blackwood. They watched in tense silence as the 3 men mounted their horses and rode away. We need to prepare, Vaughn said as soon as they were out of earshot. They won't wait long before making good on those threats. Kate nodded grimly. I'll send word to the neighboring ranches. The McAllisters and Johnsons have no love for the railroad either. They might help. I'll still ride for that lawyer tomorrow, Vaughn said. We need legal protection as well as guns. As they made preparations, the intended proposal was momentarily forgotten. They spent the evening discussing strategies, sending a ranch hand to deliver messages to neighboring properties and checking their weapons. It was only as they prepared to retire for the night that Vaughn remembered the ring. Kate was banking the fire when he retrieved the small box from his saddlebag. Kate, he said, drawing her attention, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. She turned, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. What is it? Vaughn realized this still wasn't the perfect moment, both exhausted, worried about the future, the threat of violence hanging over them. But perhaps there was no perfect moment in a life like theirs, only perfect intentions. He crossed to her and took her hands in his. I came here because of a promise to your father, but I've stayed because of a promise to myself to never again let something precious slip away without fighting for it. Understanding dawned in her eyes as he dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. Katherine Dawson, I love you. Not just for your strength or your courage, though those things amaze me daily. I love your heart, your spirit, the way you face each day with determination no matter what it brings. He released one of her hands to retrieve the box, opening it to reveal the emerald ring. Will you marry me? Join your life with mine, whatever challenges come our way. Tears welled in Kate's eyes, the first he'd seen from her despite all the hardships they'd faced together. You choose now to ask this, with the railroad threatening everything we have. I choose now precisely because of that, he said earnestly. I want you to know that whatever comes, we face it together, as partners, as husband and wife, if you'll have me. A tear slipped down her cheek as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment, then she found her voice. Yes. Yes, I will marry you, Vaughn Blackwood. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion that had built between them over the months. When they finally parted, both were smiling despite the challenges that lay ahead. We should marry soon, Kate said, practical even in this moment. Before the railroad makes its move. Vaughn nodded. I'll speak to the preacher in Helena when I go tomorrow. Perhaps he can come out to the ranch by week's end. They spent the night in their separate cabins as propriety demanded, but both with lighter hearts despite the looming conflict. The next morning, Vaughn rode for Helena with dual purposes to secure legal counsel and to arrange their wedding. In town, he first sought out Judge Hollister, a fair-minded man known for standing against corporate interests. The judge listened to their situation, stroking his gray beard thoughtfully. Western Union has powerful friends in the territorial government, he warned. But their threats of violence cross a line. I'll review your case and the original land grants. If your claim is sound, I'll support it. Encouraged, Vaughn next visited Reverend Mitchell, explaining his wish to marry as soon as possible. I'd be honored to perform the ceremony, the Reverend said. I can ride out day after tomorrow if that suits. Perfect, Vaughn agreed. And one more thing. Could you keep this quiet? We have some trouble with the railroad and I'd rather not broadcast our plans. The Reverend nodded understandingly. Of course. These days, it's wise to be cautious where big money is concerned. Vaughn made one final stop at the general store, purchasing supplies and a simple white dress that he hoped would fit Kate. It wasn't the wedding finery a woman normally might expect, but he hoped she would understand the sentiment behind it. As he prepared to leave town, a voice called his name. Turning, he saw Williams, the railroad man, approaching with his 2 guards. Mr. Blackwood, Williams said smoothly. I trust you've had time to discuss our offer with Miss Dawson. We have, Vaughn replied coolly. The answer remains no. Williams sighed dramatically. Such stubbornness is unfortunate. I've just received word that Western Union is prepared to increase its offer to $1,500. Quite generous, I think you'll agree. The land's not for sale, Vaughn repeated. Not at any price. A flash of genuine anger crossed Williams' face. Don't be a fool. No one stands against the railroad and prospers. We'll take our chances, Vaughn said, turning to mount his horse. Perhaps this will change your mind, Williams said, holding out an envelope. A copy of territorial records showing that James Dawson never properly filed his claim to the full acreage. Technically, Miss Dawson only legally owns the original homestead 80 acres, not the 500 she claims. Vaughn took the envelope, his expression revealing nothing as he tucked it into his coat. I'll make sure Miss Dawson sees this. Good day, Mr. Williams. He rode hard back to the ranch, his mind racing. If the documents were genuine, their position was significantly weaker. But he suspected manipulation records could be altered, officials bribed. Kate was waiting anxiously when he returned, relief washing over her face at the sight of him. How did it go? Vaughn dismounted, handing her the packages with the dress carefully hidden at the bottom. Judge Hollister will help us, and the Reverend is coming day after tomorrow. Joy lit her features. So soon, that's wonderful. He hesitated, then handed her the envelope. Williams gave me this, claims your father never properly filed for all the acreage. Kate's expression darkened as she read the documents. "This is nonsense. My father was meticulous about legal matters. I have his original paperwork in the strongbox." Together, they retrieved the box from its hiding place beneath a floorboard in the cabin. Inside were deeds, maps, and filing receipts, all carefully preserved despite the fire that had destroyed the original house. "Here," Kate said triumphantly, producing a document. The full claim filed and recorded in 1858, signed by the territorial governor himself. Vaughn examined the paper, comparing it to William's document. "The dates have been altered on his copy. They're trying to claim your father only extended the claim in 1862 after the Homestead Act, but failed to complete the process." "Forgery," Kate said flatly. "Will Judge Hollister recognize it as such if he sees your original documents?" "Yes," Vaughn assured her, "but we should keep these secure. I wouldn't put it past Williams to try to destroy them." The next day was spent preparing for both the wedding and potential trouble. Word came back from neighboring ranches the McAllisters and Johnsons would stand with them against the railroad, sending men to help patrol the property. By evening, 6 additional hands had arrived, setting up camp near the new barn. Kate greeted them warmly, her natural leadership evident as she outlined the situation and assigned watch positions. "The railroad men may try to intimidate us," she explained, "or worse. But this land belongs to the people who work it, not to Eastern corporations." The men nodded in agreement, many having faced similar pressures on their own properties. Western Union's aggressive expansion was creating enemies throughout the territory. As darkness fell, Vaughn found Kate standing on the porch, looking out over the land that had been her family's for nearly 20 years. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. She shook her head. "Not about marrying you. But I wonder if I'm right to drag everyone into this fight. People could get hurt." "They're here because they believe in what we're fighting for," Vaughn said. "The right to keep what we've earned, to not be bullied by men with money but no morals." Kate smiled wryly. "When did you become so philosophical?" "When I met a woman worth fighting for," he replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, her usual self-sufficiency softening. "I never thought I'd find someone who understands what this land means to me. Who doesn't see it as something to be exploited or sold. This land is part of you," Vaughn said simply. "I love all of you, including that." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the clear Montana sky. Tomorrow would bring their wedding day, and with it, perhaps, a new chapter in their lives. "I have something for you," Vaughn said finally, remembering the package he'd brought from town. "For tomorrow." Kate looked at him curiously as he retrieved the bundle and handed it to her. Unwrapping it, she gasped softly as the simple white dress came into view. "It's not fancy," he apologized. "But I thought it's perfect," she interrupted, fingers tracing the modest lace at the collar. "Truly, Vaughn, thank you." The genuine pleasure in her eyes warmed him more than any fire could have. Kate wasn't a woman who needed or wanted extravagance. She valued thoughtfulness, practicality, and sincerity far more. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of anticipation. The men from neighboring ranches helped with chores, allowing Vaughn and Kate time to prepare for the ceremony. Reverend Mitchell arrived just before noon, his buggy kicking up dust as it approached the ranch. "A fine day for a wedding," he called cheerfully as Vaughn greeted him. "Though I see you're prepared for less pleasant visitors as well." He nodded toward the armed men positioned around the property. "Precautions," Vaughn confirmed. "We've had threats from the railroad." The Reverend's expression darkened. "Western Union has much to answer for in how they've conducted business in this territory. I'm glad to play a small part in strengthening those who stand against them." The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock, to be held outside near the creek where Vaughn and Kate had shared their first kiss. Simple decorations, wildflowers gathered that morning. Ribbons borrowed from neighboring women transformed the ordinary spot into something special. Vaughn waited nervously with the Reverend, wearing his best shirt and the new vest he'd purchased in town. The small gathering of neighbors and ranch hands stood nearby, an unlikely but supportive wedding party, when Kate appeared, walking slowly toward him in the white dress, a crown of wildflowers in her hair. Vaughn felt his breath catch. She had always been beautiful to him, strong, capable, determined. But today, with joy softening her features and love shining in her eyes, she was radiant. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, traditional vows exchanged with genuine emotion. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers and whoops that echoed across the open land. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Food contributed by neighboring ranches, music from a fiddle played by one of the Johnson hands, and plenty of good whiskey created an atmosphere of festivity despite the underlying tension of their situation. As the afternoon wore on, Kate and Vaughn circulated among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Judge Hollister, who had ridden out with the Reverend, pulled them aside for a private conversation. "I've reviewed your documents," he said, keeping his voice low. "Your claim is legitimate without question. The railroad's documents are clearly altered." Relief washed over Kate's face. "Can you help us formalize that finding, make it official?" "I've already begun the process," the judge assured them. "I've sent telegrams to the territorial capital questioning the railroad's tactics, but I must warn you, legal processes move slowly. Western Union may try to create facts on the ground before the law can protect you." "We understand," Vaughn said grimly, "and we're prepared." As if summoned by their conversation, a sentry called out from his position on the ridge. "Riders coming, at least a dozen." The celebration halted abruptly. Men moved to defensive positions, women and children hurried to the safety of the cabin. Judge Hollister and Reverend Mitchell exchanged concerned glances. "Perhaps I should speak with them," the judge offered. "My position might carry some weight." "Thank you," Kate said, already checking the rifle that was never far from reach, even on her wedding day. "But stay behind cover. These men don't necessarily respect the law." Vaughn positioned himself at the front of their improvised defense line, watching as the approaching riders came into view. Williams was at their head, flanked by his usual guards, with at least 10 other armed men behind them. They stopped a safe distance from the ranch, just out of effective rifle range. Williams rode forward alone, a white handkerchief held aloft in a mocking gesture of truce. "Miss Dawson," he called, "or should I say Mrs. Blackwood now, congratulations on your nuptials." "State your business, Williams," Vaughn replied, not bothering to ask how the man knew of their wedding. "Simply delivering a message," Williams said, his tone falsely pleasant. "Western Union's final offer, $2,000 for the property with 1 week for you to vacate." Judge Hollister stepped forward, his distinguished bearing unmistakable. "Mr. Williams, I am Judge Hollister of the Territorial Court. I have reviewed the Dawson land claims and found them entirely legitimate. Any action against this property would constitute criminal trespass and potentially much worse." Williams' smile tightened. "Judge Hollister, how unexpected to find you at this rustic celebration. I'm afraid you're operating with incomplete information. Western Union has received authorization from the territorial governor to secure this right-of-way by any means necessary." "Any legal means," the judge corrected sharply, "which does not include forgery of documents or armed intimidation." For the first time, Williams appeared slightly unsettled. "I don't know what you're implying, Your Honor, but Western Union operates within the law." "We shall see," the judge replied. "I've requested a full investigation into your company's methods in this territory." Williams' facade of pleasantness dropped entirely. "Investigation or not, the railroad will be built. You have 1 week to accept our offer and leave peacefully." He turned his horse, then added over his shoulder, "After that, we cannot guarantee the safety of anyone remaining on this property." They watched as the railroad men rode away, tension thick in the air. "Well," Reverend Mitchell said into the silence that followed, "I believe this calls for another round of that excellent whiskey, followed by fervent prayer." His attempt at lightening the mood succeeded somewhat, drawing nervous laughter from the assembled group. The celebration resumed, though more subdued than before. As evening approached, their guests began to depart, each promising to return if trouble came. Judge Hollister was the last to leave, clasping Vaughn's hand firmly. "I meant what I said about the investigation," he assured them. But Williams is right about one thing: the territorial governor is firmly in the railroad's pocket. Be vigilant. After everyone had gone, Vaughn and Kate stood on the porch of the cabin, their cabin now, as husband and wife. Despite the threats hanging over them, there was a sense of rightness, of completion, in standing together. Not exactly the peaceful wedding night I'd hoped to give you, Vaughn said, his arm around her waist. Kate leaned against him, a smile playing at her lips. I don't know, there's something fitting about it. Our relationship began in gunfire, why not our marriage? Vaughn laughed, marveling at her ability to find humor even in dire circumstances. You're an extraordinary woman, Katherine Blackwood. She turned in his arms, her expression softening. And you're the man I never thought I'd find. One who doesn't try to change me or protect me from my own choices. I'd be a fool to try either, he said honestly. You're perfect exactly as you are. Their kiss deepened, the day's tensions temporarily forgotten as they focused solely on each other. They had a week before William's deadline, a week to prepare, to strategize, and to begin their life together despite the shadows gathering around them. The next morning, they rode out together to inspect the property boundaries, discussing defensive options if the railroad men made good on their threats. Kate knew every inch of the land, pointing out natural features that could provide cover or vantage points. The creek bend here gives us good visibility in both directions, she explained, gesturing to the east. And the ridge to the north overlooks the main approach from town. Vaughn nodded, impressed as always by her tactical thinking. We should position men at both points. Maybe build some simple barriers for additional cover. They spent the day setting up defensive positions, working alongside the handful of hands who had stayed on after the wedding. By nightfall, they had created a perimeter that would give them warning of any approach. The days that followed fell into a pattern: ranch work in the mornings, defensive preparations in the afternoons, and evenings spent together in their cabin, talking, planning, and growing closer as husband and wife. Despite the circumstances, these were happy days, filled with a sense of purpose and partnership that neither had experienced before. On the fourth day after William's ultimatum, a lone rider approached the ranch. Kate spotted him from her position on the ridge and signaled to Vaughn, who was working in the corral. One man, she called, coming from the direction of Helena. They met the rider at the boundary they'd established, rifles ready but not aimed. To their surprise, it was a young man wearing the uniform of a telegraph operator. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, he asked nervously, eyeing their weapons. That's us, Vaughn confirmed. What brings you out this way? The young man held out an envelope. Telegram for you, sir, marked urgent. Station manager said I should deliver it personally. Vaughn took the envelope, tipping the messenger with a coin. They watched him ride away before opening the message. It's from Judge Hollister, Vaughn said, scanning the paper. His expression darkened as he read. What is it? Kate asked, concern evident in her voice. The judge has been removed from the bench, Vaughn said grimly. Ordered back to Washington by the territorial governor, he says it's clearly related to our case, but he can't prove it. Kate's face fell. So we've lost our legal protection. It seems so. Vaughn folded the telegram carefully. The deadline is in 3 days. We need to decide what to do. They discussed their options as they rode back to the ranch house. Stay and fight, potentially against overwhelming odds. Try to negotiate better terms, though Williams had made clear their final offer, or leave, abandoning the land that had been in Kate's family for a generation. I won't leave, Kate said firmly as they reached the cabin. This land is all I have left of my family. It's where my parents are buried. Where we were married, I'll die defending it if necessary. Vaughn nodded, having expected no less. Then we fight, but we need more help. That evening, they sent riders to every friendly ranch within a day's journey asking for support. The response was heartening. By the next day, nearly 20 men had arrived, bringing weapons and supplies. The railroad's heavy-handed tactics had created enemies throughout the territory, and many were eager for a chance to push back. With their reinforcements, Vaughn and Kate improved their defensive positions, creating a strategy that would maximize their smaller numbers against William's force, which would likely be larger. On the evening before the deadline, they gathered everyone in the barn to review the plan one final time. Kate stood before the assembled men, her presence commanding despite her slight frame. "Tomorrow, the railroad men will come expecting us to surrender or flee," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the building. "They'll find neither. We stand here not just for this ranch, but for every homesteader and rancher who has faced similar threats." The men nodded in solemn agreement. Many had stories of their own pressure to sell, mysterious cattle rustling when they refused, threats against family members. "We won't fire first," Vaughn added, stepping up beside his wife, "but we will defend ourselves if attacked. Each of you should know that this could be dangerous. There's no shame in riding out tonight if you have second thoughts." No one moved. The solidarity in the room was palpable, a shared determination to make a stand against the powerful interests that threatened their way of life. As the meeting concluded and the men dispersed to their assigned positions, Vaughn and Kate walked back to their cabin under a sky brilliant with stars. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Kate said softly, "I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life." Vaughn stopped, turning to face her. "Nothing's going to happen to you tomorrow," he said with fierce conviction. "I didn't ride all night to save you just to lose you now." She smiled at the reference to their beginning. "And I didn't marry you just to become a widow, so you be careful too." They held each other close, the night breeze cool around them, each silently acknowledging the dangers the morning would bring. Dawn broke clear and cold, the Montana sky a vast canvas of pink and gold. Vaughn and Kate rose early, checking defensive positions and ensuring everyone was prepared. By mid-morning, the lookout on the ridge spotted dust on the horizon. "They're coming," he called down. "Looks like 20, maybe 25 riders," Vaughn nodded grimly. "Just as we expected. Everyone hold positions. Remember, no firing unless they fire first." Kate positioned herself on the porch of the cabin, rifle in hand, a calm determination in her bearing. Vaughn stood beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, a united front. The railroad men approached slowly, spreading out in a wide formation as they neared the ranch. Williams rode at their center, flanked by his usual guards. They stopped just beyond the boundary markers Vaughn and Kate had established. "Mrs. Blackwood," Williams called, his voice carrying across the open space. "I see you've chosen the hard way, unfortunate but not unexpected." "This land is legally ours," Kate replied steadily. "We will defend it," Williams sighed theatrically. "I have 30 armed men at my disposal. You have what, 20? The odds are not in your favor." "We're on the right side of this fight," Vaughn responded. "That counts for more than numbers." A cold smile spread across Williams' face. "Righteousness doesn't stop bullets, Mr. Blackwood." He turned to his men. "Prepare to." His order was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats, many hoofbeats approaching from the east. All eyes turned to see a large group of riders cresting the hill, at least 40 strong, led by a figure in a marshal's uniform. "What the devil?" Williams muttered, clearly caught off guard. The newcomers rode directly to the space between the two opposing forces, forming a line that separated Williams' men from the ranch. The marshal rode forward, his badge glinting in the morning sun. "Prescott Williams," he called, his voice authoritative. "I am Marshal Thomas Reynolds, newly appointed by the federal government, not the territorial governor." Williams' expression betrayed his confusion. "What is the meaning of this, Marshal? We are conducting legitimate business on behalf of Western Union Railroad." Reynolds' laugh was short and without humor. "Is that what you call forgery of land documents, intimidation, and attempted armed seizure of private property?" "The Department of Justice has taken an interest in Western Union's activities in this territory following complaints filed by Judge Hollister before his reassignment." Hope surged through Vaughn as he listened. He glanced at Kate, seeing the same cautious optimism in her eyes. "I have warrants for your arrest," Reynolds continued, producing papers from his coat, "along with several of your associates on charges of fraud, attempted extortion, and conspiracy." Williams' face reddened with anger. "This is outrageous." "Western Union has authorization from a corrupt territorial governor who has also been suspended pending investigation," Reynolds interrupted. Federal authority supersedes territorial in cases of suspected corruption, Mr. Williams. Now, you and your men will surrender your weapons and come with us peacefully, or we can do this the hard way. For a tense moment, it seemed Williams might order his men to fight, but looking at the overwhelming force arrayed against him, he visibly deflated. "This isn't over," he muttered as he reluctantly handed over his pistol to the marshal. "Western Union has lawyers in Washington who will save it for the judge," Reynolds said dismissively, signaling his deputies to disarm the rest of Williams' men. As the federal marshals took the railroad men into custody, Reynolds rode over to where Vaughn and Kate stood watching in amazement. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, I presume," he said, tipping his hat. "Judge Hollister sends his regards. He may have been removed from the bench here, but he has friends in the Justice Department who took his concerns seriously." "We can't thank you enough, Marshal," Kate said, relief evident in her voice. "But what happens now? Will the railroad try again?" Reynolds dismounted, approaching them with a more informal air. "Western Union has been served with a federal injunction prohibiting them from attempting to acquire your land or any other properties in this territory through coercion or fraudulent means. They'll fight it in court, of course, but that will take years." "And the railroad itself?" Vaughn asked. "Will it still be built?" "Almost certainly," Reynolds acknowledged. "Progress can't be stopped entirely, but they'll have to negotiate fairly with landowners and follow proper legal channels." No more strong-arm tactics. The news spread quickly among their defenders, cheers and whoops of joy rising from various positions around the property. The tension that had built over the past week released in a wave of celebration. As the marshals departed with their prisoners, Vaughn and Kate stood on their porch, watching as their friends and neighbors gathered in the yard, the atmosphere transforming from grim determination to jubilant relief. "We did it," Kate said softly, leaning against Vaughn's side. "We saved the ranch." "We did," he agreed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Together." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "So what now, Mr. Blackwood? Without a fight to prepare for, we might have to settle for ordinary ranch life." Vaughn smiled, thinking of all they had endured to reach this moment and all that lay ahead of them. "Somehow, I doubt life with you could ever be ordinary, Mrs. Blackwood." Over the weeks that followed, life indeed settled into a pattern, though hardly an ordinary one. With the railroad threat neutralized, they focused on rebuilding and expanding the ranch. The men who had come to their aid returned to their own properties, but the bonds formed during their stand against Western Union created a community more tightly knit than before. Vaughn and Kate worked side by side, equal partners in every sense. They expanded the cattle herd, repaired fences, and added rooms to their cabin as winter approached. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant colors, planning their future together. When spring came, bringing new calves and green grass to the land, Kate shared news that brought Vaughn more joy than he had thought possible. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Kate covered his hand with hers, her smile radiant. "The ranch will have a new generation to care for it." The months that followed were filled with preparations both for the coming child and for the ranch's future. Vaughn built a proper nursery adjoining their bedroom, carving a small cradle from pine harvested on their land. Kate sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her practical nature ensuring that each piece was sturdy as well as beautiful. As Kate's pregnancy progressed, Vaughn found himself increasingly protective, taking on more of the physical labor despite her protests that she was with child, not invalid. Their good-natured disagreements on the matter became a source of amusement for the ranch hands, who wisely stayed neutral in the debate. Summer turned to fall, the land preparing for winter's rest, when their daughter entered the world on a clear October night. They named her Josephine after Kate's mother and called her Josie for short. She had Kate's auburn hair and Vaughn's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Vaughn, who had faced Confederate artillery with less fear than he felt watching Kate in labor, held his daughter with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the surge of love and protectiveness that washed over him. "She's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning the swaddled infant to Kate's arms. Just like her mother, Kate smiled tiredly, the exhaustion of childbirth evident but overshadowed by joy. She has your stubbornness already. Took her time coming into this world. Life adjusted to accommodate their new addition. The ranch continued to thrive, with Vaughn managing more of the day-to-day operations while Kate recovered and cared for Josie. But it wasn't long before Kate was back in the saddle, baby secured against her chest in a sling, refusing to be sidelined from the work she loved. As promised by Marshal Reynolds, the railroad eventually came to Montana territory, but on different terms than Western Union had initially planned. The new line passed 5 miles south of the Blackwood Ranch, close enough to provide convenient access for shipping cattle, but far enough to preserve the peace and beauty of their land. Years passed, marked by the seasons of ranching life and the milestones of their growing family. Josie was joined by a brother, James, named for Kate's father, and later by another sister, Elizabeth. The cabin expanded into a proper house, with rooms added as needed, always built by Vaughn's hands with materials from their land. The children grew strong and capable, learning ranching skills from both parents. Josie, the eldest, showed Kate's determination and head for business. James inherited Vaughn's quiet strength and patience with animals. Elizabeth, the youngest, combined both parents' traits with a fierce independence all her own. Through it all, the harsh winters and bountiful springs, the difficult years when drought threatened their herd and the prosperous ones when cattle prices were high, Vaughn and Kate remained partners in every sense. Their love, forged in crisis and tested by the challenges of frontier life, only deepened with time. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, their children now old enough to manage most ranch operations, Vaughn surprised Kate with a trip to Helena, their first journey away from the ranch together since their marriage. "The children can handle things for a week," he insisted when she protested. "You've earned a rest." In town, they stayed at the finest hotel, ate at restaurants, and attended the theater luxuries they rarely indulged in. But the highlight came when Vaughn presented Kate with the deed to an additional 500 acres adjoining their property, land that had once been threatened by the railroad but was now securely theirs. "For our grandchildren," he explained as she examined the document with astonishment. "And their grandchildren after them." Kate looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. 20 years ago, you rode all night to save me from losing everything. I never imagined then what we would build together." Vaughn took her hands in his, noticing how they had changed over the years, more calloused, marked by small scars from 2 decades of ranch work, yet still strong and capable. "I rode all night to save you," he said softly, "but you saved me right back, gave me purpose, a home, a family. Everything that matters." As they stood together in their hotel room, 20 years of shared life between them and many more ahead, Kate smiled at the man who had kept his promise in ways neither could have imagined that first night. "A lifetime," she murmured, leaning into his embrace. "And I wouldn't change a day of it." Vaughn held her close, thinking of the desperate ride that had brought him to her and all that had followed. "Neither would I, my love, neither would I." In the years that followed, the Blackwood Ranch prospered, becoming one of the largest and most respected cattle operations in Montana. Their children grew to adulthood, each finding their own path while maintaining deep connections to the land and to each other. Josie, with her mother's business sense, eventually took over management of ranch operations. James, gentle with animals but fierce in protecting family interests, became known throughout the territory as a fair but formidable rancher. Elizabeth, the free spirit, traveled east for education before returning to Montana to start a school on ranch property, ensuring that local children wouldn't have to choose between education and ranch life. Grandchildren came, filling the expanded ranch house with laughter and energy that kept Vaughn and Kate young at heart despite graying hair and slower steps. The legacy they had fought for continued to grow, rooted in the land they had defended together. On quiet evenings, they would still sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, Vaughn's arm around Kate's shoulders just as it had been that first year. They would reminisce about the beginning, the desperate ride, the siege, the wedding in the shadow of danger, and marvel at how one moment of crisis had blossomed into a lifetime of love. "I'm glad you stayed," Kate would often say, leaning her head against his shoulder. And Vaughn would always answer with absolute certainty, "I couldn't have done anything else." For a cowboy who rode all night to save her had stayed a lifetime to keep her, and in doing so had found everything he never knew he was searching for.